Welcome on into the Utah Blockcast. I'm Steve Bartle, Utah Insider for KSL Sports. Appreciate everybody for tuning in to the podcast on YouTube or your podcast platform, whatever you listen to. Appreciate all the support. It's been a lot of fun. Like I've said the last few episodes, it's been good to be a little bit more consistent actually doing this during the off season. Appreciated Blair Angulo for hopping on the last episode. If you haven't listened to that, I would recommend going and tuning into that. Blair shared a lot of great insights into the current state of Utah recruiting, and I thought that was really good, a really fun conversation with Blair. On this episode, I welcome in Isaac Trotter of 24/7 Sports, and Isaac is really one of the rising stars in terms of college basketball coverage. I think he's done a really good job over the last couple of years of assessing rosters and assessing individual games and making solid predictions on what sort of impact to expect from players. So I thought that he would be great to bring on, and I really appreciate that he was willing to come on. I know he's busy; he's got a lot on his plate right now, as there's so much going on with roster construction. But I think Isaac really shared some good thoughts on the Runnin Utes and the Big 12 in general. So really excited about that, and so let's get to it. Let's get to my conversation with Isaac Trotter. All right. What's up, Isaac? How you doing, man?
Doing well. Thanks for having me.
Dude, I appreciate you taking some time to hop on the pod here with me. It was interesting. I was doing just some college basketball reading. I was on vacation and came across an article from you last summer that inspired me to reach out to you to get you on the podcast. I was reading your Big 12 transfer projections, and I thought that you nailed Utah's projections on the individual players, their role, and what that would sort of look like. And so I know that you do a great job analyzing college basketball, and I thought I just so I'm fired up to have you on the podcast to talk about this year's transfer portal cycle.
Yeah, of course. No, it's fun because I love diving into each individual player. It's like I feel like sometimes in college basketball, we kind of get enamored with like the teams. I love to get in the
Yeah.
nitty gritty of the personnel of like, what does this team actually look like? What are the strengths and weaknesses of this personnel? That's fun for me. So yeah, I'm actually in the works of kind of like going through all of that again for every individual
Nice.
transfer. It's a lot, but you know what? I love it, and honestly, it's not work for me. This is the best part of my job.
Dude, that's incredible because like I said, like you went through each one of Utah's transfer editions, and like I said, I thought, now that we have hindsight, right? I thought you nailed each of them. Like reading your assessment of Ezra Asar, I thought you were spot on. Miro Little, being the ultimate X factor, I thought that proved to be the case. And you didn't, it wasn't just Utah. You did that across, the Big 12 conference, other conferences. So man, it's I know that you do your homework, and like I said, I'm fired up to have you on. So, um, let's talk first of all. This past year, Utah making the transition from the Pac-12 to the Big 12. What did you make of Utah in their first year in the Big 12 conference?
Yeah, I think it was interesting. I think we kind of knew kind of that losing Davion Smith was going to be a big deal. Losing
Yeah,
Brandon Carlson is going to be a really big deal. All right, what does this look like? And, for the most part, maybe this is a hot take. I thought Craig Smith was okay. I thought he did
yeah,
a fine job with his roster building. I thought the plans, the X's and O's were good. It just hasn't worked out. And when they figured that maybe we could upgrade with an Alex Jensen, I think it made sense. But, as I kind of watched them, I just felt like there was a little bit of an athleticism gap compared to with the rest of the Big 12. You just see that some of these souped up wings that
yeah,
it felt like Utah didn't necessarily have that. And so, I love Gabe Madsen. I've covered Gabe Madsen since he was in high school back in the day in Rochester, Minnesota. So like I've seen him for a
wow,
really long time. He's a really talented player, but like when he's your number one wing and he's an off the move specialist, right? Like and
yeah.
he has to kind of like create for his own shot off the bounce to kind of save possessions. It felt like they were a little bit in dire straits there. So you kind of could see the writing on the wall there in Big 12 play once the athleticism, type of concerns start to manifest themselves a little bit.
Yeah, I thought that that's essentially the lesson learned was that the athleticism across the board, right? Not just in the backcourt, but in the front court as well. And I think That was a difficult lesson to learn, but here we are, and as you sort of alluded to it, obviously Utah made the coaching change, and it was met with some criticism given the timing of it, and I think the criticism was ultimately fair, given the timing of it. There's still, I think it was 5 or 6 games left in the season, and it's just something that you don't see, and so Utah, knowing what was going on behind the scenes, I feel like Utah, made the decision that they knew they were ultimately going to make, and given the timing of it, and where they felt they were with their dream hire, Alex Jensen, who was a guy that the fan base wanted. The last time this spot opened up, I think it's now hiring Jensen. It's sort of reinvigorated the fan base, and there's a lot of excitement not only for Jensen, but now the coaching hires that he's made, to fill out his staff. There's a lot of excitement there. I would be curious, just given the excitement here locally for Jensen's return, what's sort of the national perspective on Alex Jensen and some of his assistants and staff that he's brought in?
Yeah, I think a lot of people are just kind of curious to see what is this going to look like for them. And I think nationally wise, a lot of people have just jumped to the conclusion of, oh, they're copying the BYU model, and
Yeah.
I think that's fair, I guess, a little bit, but it feels a little bit hesitant. I'm not the one championing that type of narrative. Like
Good.
I'm kind of
Good.
open-minded about like what this could potentially look like. It felt a little lazy to me when I kind of start to see people say that, just because it's just different. And I think the fact that he's played here really matters. I think I'm just curious to see kind of like what the roster building looks like moving forward, how much resources they have, and like that's the thing that we didn't necessarily know about nationally. Like how much is Utah working with NIL wise? How much is this going to change differently when Alex Jensen gets involved? What does this look like in the revenue sharing model moving forward? How much does basketball matter? Like all of those things are different question marks. But the basketball parts of that of the Alex Jensen hire are unequivocal. Like we've had some concerns, I guess, nationally about like NBA guys coming to college basketball. What does that mean? I've kind of honestly, I don't care about that stuff anymore, because a lot of NBA guys are now coming to the college ranks. It feels just like a real area where is growing and is probably going to continue to grow in the growing future.
Yeah, I think like that's really sort of spot on, is you're seeing more NBA guys, come to the league. And Alex Jensen has made the point that, with the evolution of college basketball, with NIL being a thing that, one of the most important things that he wanted to get done, after his hire was hiring a general manager. And, so that came shortly after the hiring of Rafael Chilius, who's one of the top recruiters of the past decade. If you go back to his time at Washington, Villanova, even Eastern Carolina, he had an impressive stint there. But, hiring those two and then filling out the rest of his staff with good, smart hires, I think there's a lot of interest, a lot of excitement to see what this actually looks like. And as you mentioned, I think there's going to be more and more NBA coaches that make this transition to the college game because of how it's evolving with the money and all of that. I'd be curious your thoughts on the importance of, programs having a good general manager and what that means.
Yeah, it's super vital. I think the thing that's really changed is that like recruiting isn't like 3-year relationships anymore. It's not
Right.
like, oh, I watched him in 15s and 16s and 17s in AAU, and I know the family. And if that was the case, like Mike Boynton would probably still be at Oklahoma State for getting like Cade Cunningham there, right, back in the day, because
Right.
he was just so good with relationships. And yeah, relationships matter as much, but you talk to coaches, you talk to general managers. It's 3 weeks of dating basically, and it's
Right.
a hop on a Zoom, pitch your pitch. What's the money? What's the role? What's my development? Make a decision. And so I think that like has given, new coaches, especially coaches that maybe they're not like super familiar with the AAU scene, a chance to be competitive right away, because it's not necessarily, obviously who is important and getting your names in there, but like, it's really more about the role, what's the money, and what can you do for me? And, that's the part that I think Jensen is going to be like, it's going to be curious to see like how his player development continues to be a pitch for him moving forward. How can we make guys better? Like, I know how to get you to the league. How much does that resonate with different guys? And if that's the case, what does that look like in recruiting? But yeah, general managers, it's super important. I think
Right.
It's kind of weird. Like the more people you talk to, like sometimes general managers for some teams are like kind of more involved behind the scenes with fundraising and stuff like that. Other general managers are very much of like the player personnel stuff and like scouting the mid-major ranks well before the portal starts, that pre-portal process, like understanding the international stuff, bringing names to staffs, like, hey, what are we looking for in our archetypes of our roster build? Here's 9 guys, here's the cost of them, here's what we need in the budget, stuff like that. So it's kind of curious to see kind of where they fall on that line. And I think the biggest difference with general managers in college versus the NBA is that in the NBA, coaches work underneath general managers in the league. In college, the number one honcho is the head coach, and then the general manager is working for him.
That's an interesting dynamic, and I think it's important to have a good relationship between general manager and coach in that instance. And I think, for Utah, the nice thing there is a history between Jensen and Wes Wilcox, who I think everybody is pretty fired up about. So, all right, Isaac, let's get into the nitty gritty of this podcast, and why I'm excited to have you on is just your assessment of individual players, your read on sort of rosters and all that sort of stuff. As we'll hone in on some individual takes, but as you look at the commitment list, you look at what Utah's bringing back with their roster, and you project forward to 2025, 2026. What do you think? Alex Jensen, his staff, what do you think they're putting together with this list of guys that they've landed so far?
I think the first thing that stands out is big wings that can guard multiple positions. I think that's something that you see in the NBA a lot, and that's kind of what they brought over into the college ranks. Like Ja'Kai Howard out of Auburn, he is 6'6", 185 pounds. You watch anything of him, he can put his absolute chin on the rim. Insane athlete, and so I think you get excited about what he could be defensively, in addition to what he brings offensively. Seydou Traore, same thing, transfer out of Iowa, 6'7", 220, started his career in Manhattan. And you watch him in Manhattan, you're like, how is that athlete playing in this league? It just doesn't work, right? Yeah. He's a big time athlete, and that started to showcase itself a little bit at Iowa. So I think that switchability defensively is something that first stands out with this group. Obviously, I have some concerns about the backcourt, but I think they make sense with what their additions, and we'll get into the personnel even more, but like Terrence Brown is like a guard who loves to get to the rim. You kind of pair him with Don McHenry, who's like a veteran who is more of a shooter and likes to really operate on the perimeter. I like that there's not overlap of that. Like they're different type of players. It's not that positional overlap where you can kind of see a vision where like McHenry can help out Brown and Brown can help out McHenry because their strengths are different. So that's like the roster building that I think some of the older coaches in college basketball have struggled with, of like understanding like how players fit together early on, right? Like Utah obviously needs to add more talent, but early on you can start to see the idea of what this roster wants to be. Like it makes sense. Will it work? Well, I mean, we're going to all find out together in 6 months, but like it makes sense on paper.
Yeah, I think that's a great starting point, is that it does make sense, and you sort of see what they're trying to build. Now, is it going to be enough? Have they done enough? They still have 4 open roster spots, and so there's still work to be done. But as they've done the bulk of their recruiting so far and constructing this roster, I think there's a lot of excitement about what this roster could be, in the sense that Alex Jensen has highlighted Houston as a team that, hey, this is a team that they know what they're doing. It starts on the defensive end. They're smart, they're disciplined, they play hard, they're athletic. And I think, they've got a long ways to go to sort of replicate what Kelvin Sampson has done. But I think you see the mimicking there of the sort of athletes and the sort of body types that Utah's looking for. They want athleticism, they want length, as you mentioned with Ja'Kai Howard. For me, I think Utah landed Terrence Brown, Elijah Moore, James Okonkwo, and then they landed Ja'Kai Howard. And that was the one for me where I sort of like, you lean forward in your chair like, oh, you've got my attention now, right? Like this is interesting. As you look at the commit list and that, is there a guy that sort of stands out to you as sort of that guy that caught your attention as like, okay, it's time to start taking Utah a little more seriously here?
Yeah. I think Ja'Kai obviously is probably the biggest name, but I think McHenry's really good. Like I think Don McHenry is like a guy that when you talk about those JUCO guys that have been around, like those guys get extra year of eligibility. So, this year, I think in college basketball, you're losing already those fifth-year seniors, and then you're also losing the fourth-year seniors that aren't getting that extra year. So I think the overall raw talent's going to come down a little bit. And McHenry is part of that veteran group that gets that extra year because of the JUCO ruling. And so he's going to be one of the older players of college basketball next year. He he's been around. He's played a lot of different roles. Like last year, if you look at the numbers, like he didn't shoot it that well from three, but that was a really big like usage rate that he was going to have. Like you still watch the tape and in transition, the way he can move off the bounce, the way that he's like, if hand down, man down, like he's ready to rock and roll in that regard. Like he can get into the paint. The Big 12, there's a lot of teams that try that no middle defense. They're going to try to, and the other ones are going to probably play a lot of drop coverage. He is a guy that can kind of beat, drop coverage because he has that little float game in his bag. And he's like, I looked at him and I go, okay, like that's a double-digit score if I've ever seen one at the high major ranks. He's going to walk in and score 12 to 14 points a game, and depending on what the roster looks like, that's kind of the expectation. Will it be efficient? How much better can you get him? What's the pieces around him? Those are all questions that still have to be answered. But I think this team right now on paper starts and ends with McHenry.
I like that. And, as a veteran that's scored, quite a bit of points the last couple seasons at Western Kentucky, Utah is going to need that. They're going to need somebody that can come in and put the ball through the hoop, as much as he did. I think the goal for him with McHenry is you look at what he did this past year compared to the year before, and the efficiency in the previous year, that first year at Western Kentucky, I think is sort of the goal for Utah, bringing him in. I think, getting him, around 14 points a game, shooting more efficiently where he's closer to 37% than 31%. As you assess these guys, how much of that do you take into account where you're not just assessing, the last year? Obviously it's a big part because that's, the most recent thing, but how much do you value the career production and what they could be in their best versus their worst? Just how do you go about evaluating the entire picture?
Yeah, I think situation is everything. And the coaching staffs that can recruit the portal, understanding situation is so valuable. And, I think that's where like Terrence Brown comes into play because like you can watch the tape with him at Fairleigh Dickinson. It's like, okay, he's a 30% 3-point shooter. And if you just look at the numbers, you're like, 30%, that's not great. Then you watch the tape, you're like, that jumper looks clean. That does not look like a 30% 3-point shooter. Like eventually you can start to see what that body is going to look like down the road. He's up to 175 pounds. Like I think if he added 10 to 15 more pounds this offseason, like you could potentially see him working his way to being a competent 3-point shooter, whether that's 34, 35%. Like that's in the range of potential outcomes. So yeah, like situation matters so much. Like I can go down the list of all these different transfers of the biggest example that I think of is like Miles Kelly. Everybody looked at Miles Kelly in this last portal cycle. It was like, 32% 3-point shooter, but he took such hard shots at Georgia Tech. He transfers to Auburn. The quality of look at he's going to take is way different, way better. And look at what do you know? Auburn goes to the Final Four. Miles Kelly leads SEC in threes and shoots 40%, nearly 40% from three. So that's like context is just so important in portal scouting. And if you don't have that context, and I don't think you're fairly, adjudicating like what these players are going to be. And so if anybody who's like going to look at McHenry and be like, oh, he's a 31% 3-point shooter, it's like, well, maybe we should talk about this a little bit differently because, like, just look at the shots that he's taking. He's taking some hard ones. Can we maybe pare down his shot selection? Can we get him some easier looks? Can we play him off the ball a little bit more and then have him an opportunity to shoot maybe closer to 37% again?
I think that's such a great point, is that context matters in these evaluations. And when you look at what he was able to do year one versus year two, the context with that Western Kentucky team was the injuries that mounted for Western Kentucky this past year. They lost two of their top two scorers, and suddenly, McHenry has a bigger load on his shoulders. He's got to take tougher shots. So I think that is a great point that you make, and I think it's key to a number of projections here with this Utah roster. I'd be curious to get your thoughts on James Okonkwo, who's he's been around college basketball for a few years now, West Virginia, North Carolina, Akron, and yet he commits to Utah, and Jamie Shaw of On3 tweets out something that He's still got a lot of potential left. What do you make of his game and how he fits in this rotation?
He kind of reminds me a little bit of like what you're talking about, that Houston archetype of like wingspan matters. Like, yeah, he's 6'8",
Yeah,
240, but I think his wingspan's a little bit longer than that. I don't have the exact number in front of me. He's fascinating to me because I think he's a little bit different than Babacar Faye, who they've also added. Like Faye is like that transition rim runner. I think
right.
Okonkwo is like a little bit more of like, I think he's going to be more solid. I think you can kind of trust him to play your defensive schemes, whatever that might be. I think he's scheme versatile. He could be a switch defender. He can guard fours. I think you could see him guard some small ball fives. I think he's big enough that he could handle some of the fives in the Big 12. Like that's one thing, like context also matters in the Big 12. Like you go up and down, like there's not like that, like 7'2" monster that's playing the five at a lot of teams. Like JT Toppin, he's 6'9". Like Kansas State, they could have like Tyreek Smith play the five. He's 6'8". Kansas, they could have Flory Badunga play the five. He's 6'9". So it's like a 6'8", 240 big man. People will be like, oh, they're undersized. I think it'll be fine, honestly, like kind of looking at the rest of what the Big 12 is, and you can kind of get away with it with that. But yeah, I think, again, he's one of those guys where opportunity really matters for him. This is arguably one of his best opportunities to play 23 to 27 minutes a game. If he can turn into that type of player, I think you feel pretty good about that investment.
Yeah, I think I read somewhere he's got like a 7'2" wingspan, which I don't know how exact that is, but I think when you look at him, that checks out. He seems to have a
Totally.
7 foot wingspan. So I think that matters. And again, the size, the athleticism, the length, you see that across the Big 12, and I think that is another area where Utah sort of learned a difficult lesson that, hey, this is an athletic league. This isn't the Big 10 or the Pac-12 where you can have just these 7'1", 7'2" type guys and just, have them in the low post. You're going to have to be athletic. You're going to have to get out on the wing. And I think that's been a shift that we've seen with this roster as well. As we're talking about these transfer additions, I feel like I failed you because the most important piece to Utah's 2025-26 outlook is the guy that they brought back in Keanu Dawes, in my opinion. He really kind of turned into a double threat each night he stepped on the floor towards the final end of the year, final month of the year. And I think he was the key piece to bring back. What do you think Keanu Dawes is capable of going into next year?
I think that offensive rebounding is something that's going to be so valuable for like in this league. Like the teams that can really offensive rebound, generate second chance opportunities, have a successful game plan. And like that's something that Houston prides itself on. That's something Arizona prides itself on. You up and down the Big 12. The best teams in the Big 12 win the offensive glass and can do that at a high level. I think Dawes, as his motor continues to rev up, as his body continues to get up, like there's no reason why he can't be one of the better offensive rebounders in this league and being somebody that can really get after it on that end every single night. And then you're trying to figure out like, okay, what my role is. And that's kind of fascinating because I'm curious. I feel like he is a known and he is a constant, but I also feel like part of his role next year is still up in the air based on what they do down the stretch here. Depending on the bigs that they bring in, like, is he going to be the guy that could potentially be our starting four-man? Are we playing him as a small ball five? Like, what's our game plan here with him? But I think starting and ending with that offensive rebounding is a huge way to get playing time because, like, again, like I had the numbers in front of me, but like the teams that were elite on the offensive glass just win games. It's just year after year, it feels like those teams are. And that's his path to making a whole lot of money, both in the NIL and then, future basketball opportunities.
Yeah, I think for him, that's sort of where he made a big difference for Utah over that final month was he just became a monster on the boards. And for him, Utah didn't run a lot of action through him, but he ended up, being a 20-10 guy. He had a couple games like that. And it's just that sort of easy productivity where he's just hustling and getting after rebounds and putting them back and all that sort of stuff. So I think he's a guy that Utah is very excited to have, and they'll run more through him. But I think he's going to be a guy that is simply going to be still going to be that sort of motor guy where he's going to get a lot of his production through sheer hustle and that sort of stuff.
And that's like the type of like archetype that every team really wants, and keeping him out of the portal, I think, is a huge win just for like, okay, like the type of NIL, paycheck that we're going to have to cut. to try to get somebody that fills that role is really, really high, because there's not really, in this portal cycle, there were not that many guys that were 6'9", 220, guard multiple position, past like those type of forwards that were versatile. They just weren't out there, and the ones that were expensive. Like you had to pay up for it. So like I think that's also part of the calculus of like how valuable it is to keep a piece like that, because then you didn't have to pay for one like that. That would have probably cost. I don't know what Keanu's NIL is, but I know what some of the top fours are going for, and it is well into the 7-figure range.
Yeah, he got a nice payday. I know that much. All right, Isaac, let's talk just kind of putting this together, right? So we've talked a lot about the individuals. How do you sort of see, or project Utah starting five with this current makeup? Is there something you would like to see them add to the roster? Just what do you sort of see this starting five and rotation looking like right now?
Yeah, I don't know if I see a true point guard on this mix. Okay. When I watched Terrence Brown, he played off the ball a lot. Now, granted, he got a lot of on-ball reps, and like he had a 21% assist rate last year. So you can see some of the decision-making that you see there. Don McHenry, he's also somebody who kind of plays more off the ball as like a scorer type. So I'd be curious to see down the stretch here, like, are they able to add, a big time decision maker that could help kind of trigger this offense in different ways to maybe like get them better looks, get us into stuff. Mm-hmm. That could even be like a big wing that can play make a little bit. Ja'Kai Howard is super talented, but playmaking has not been a strength of his game so far. Like he is a run and gun athlete. I'm going to go dunk all over you. He's not like let's initiate the offense and I'm going to like have 7 assists today. So we'll see how that kind of coalesces a little bit. So I think adding a couple more of those like primary decision makers would be something that I think is a big priority for this roster moving forward. But if you go into next year and it's Brown at the 1, McHenry as like your 1-2 like kind of combo, you guys are both kind of sharing the ball there. Ja'Kai Howard at the 3, maybe Dawes at the 4 and Okonkwo at the 5, or Faye at the 5 if he's healthy. Like you can talk yourself into that group being pesky, but I still think like when you look at the Big 12 and you see how much retention has mattered, and you see JT Toppin come back to school, and you see Kansas is able to go into the recruiting ranks and get a Darren Peterson. You see what BYU has obviously done. Like this group certainly, in my opinion, I think needs 1 or 2 more big pieces if they want to compete for an at-large bid. That's just kind of how I kind of break it down as of now on, what is it, May 19th? Still time.
Right. Yeah. No, and so that sort of leads into my next question. I wanted to ask you, what is sort of, or should be the sort of the expectation or, the goal for Alex Jensen in year 1 of this rebuild? Because this is a true tear it down to the bolts type of rebuild for Utah, where they're starting from ground zero and building this thing up. What is sort of the step-by-step process for Alex in this rebuilding process?
Yeah, I think the most important thing is just being fluid. I think Houston has their identity. Michigan State has their identity. Those teams that are entrenched have their identity. But I think the best teams right now are the ones that are fluid. It's like one year our roster is going to look like this and have this strength. The next year we can kind of adjust and have different rosters on the fly with different strengths. And I think that's the thing moving forward, as like these rosters continue to flip-flop at an absurdly high level that can separate you. Now, I look at them in the Big 12. You're going to have people that maybe don't do their research on the transfers, and they're going to put Utah last. It just is what it is in the preseason Big 12 rankings. It is what it is. How can we outplay those expectations? Can we be in an at-large conversation in, mid-January, mid-February? Like, I think that would be, in my opinion, a successful season when you kind of bank on what this roster looks like now. Now, obviously, if they have some tricks up their sleeves, international recruiting is a big deal right now. Like, there's still some big free agents over there that could change the calculus of this group right now. But with the Big 12, how top-heavy it is, if you're just putting yourselves in position to finish top 10 in the Big 10, in the Big 12, get a chance to be, the 10 seed, the 9 seed in the Big 12 tournament, put yourself in position to get in that large bid or in that conversation, I feel like that would be a major, major win in year 1. Because the type of money that Utah is competing against in the Big 12 is just not fair. It's not fair. And that's where college basketball is right now. College basketball is like a lot more closer to like minor league baseball than ever before, where like some teams have just way more money than others. And Houston has real money, and Texas Tech has absurd money, and BYU has BYU money, and Kansas is only getting outbid by the teams at top. It's like, it's hard. It's really, really hard for some teams that don't have, 10, 12, $13 million to build rosters that are on par with some of the other teams in their league.
Yeah, no, I'm with you there, and I think for Utah, this is sort of an interesting time, right? This is a genuine rebuild, and you're based out of Illinois, right? Are you a Chicago Bears fan?
I am. Yes.
So I've been using this,
Pray
talking
for
with
me.
friends. Yeah, no, hey, like, so this is sort of like an NFL franchise starting over with a new quarterback, right? And what the Bears tried to do last year was load up with, pieces around Caleb Williams, bringing in Keenan Allen, who's dynamic, drafting another receiver. But I think in year one, there's so much learning going on for a Caleb Williams that, is bringing Keenan Allen in year one. Is that the right decision? With hindsight, maybe not. And I think with Utah, bringing this back to Utah, right? This is all about establishing your identity, establishing your brand, establishing, your culture and what you want to do, moving forward. So as you get into year two and year three, that's when you start to add those top big competitive, big difference makers, in my opinion. So I think that's where I sort of view this Utah basketball team is this is all about setting, your identity, your culture, your brand, and being competitive. And if they're in that at large conversation midway through the year, great. But this is all about establishing, yourself and learning, about the competition around you.
And I think the Bears comp is interesting because like the Bears kind of went with their dessert first. They loaded up on
Yeah.
all of these, like, you know what I mean? And the meat and potatoes of that roster was really thin. For Utah, I think you're kind of starting to see like, okay, Don McHenry is like a high floor type of addition. Babacar Faye, if he's healthy, could be a high floor addition. But you kind of look through the transfers that they've added. They're all transfers with multiple years of eligibility. Terrence Brown has 2 years of eligibility.
Yep.
Elijah Moore has 3 years of eligibility. Howard, 3 years of eligibility. Traore has 2 years of eligibility. Getting Dawes back, obviously 2 years of eligibility there. Like those types of additions, I talk about it a ton in the portal. Getting a transfer is great. But when you can keep them for the second year, that is when some magic really has happened. And that example is there over and over and over again. Not this past year, but the year before, 9 All-Americans on our All-American team were year 2 transfers. That's not nothing.
Wow.
And so
Yeah.
you're trying to like keep like that's like you're trying to keep those transfers that you bring in. And that's when something really, really good can happen. Because you're right. Like on paper, Ja'Kai Howard is a really, really unproven guy. Elijah Moore, super unproven guy. Traore, even still pretty unproven.
Yeah.
Terrence Brown, unproven at the high major ranks. But if you can keep them for multiple years, you can start to talk yourself into like, hey, like the vision of what this roster looks like can be a lot different if our player development's on point.
Yeah, I think that is a great point because that was a big point of emphasis for this staff was getting guys that, have those multiple years of eligibility. Obviously, you need a veteran to get you through those tough, grinded out games, but you want to build, and that's been a point of emphasis for Jensen whenever he's talked about his team and his vision for his program. So, Isaac, few more minutes here with you. I appreciate your time so much, but I know it's valuable. So let's shift gears here. Let's take a big picture view, Big 12 basketball, May 19th. How do you view the conference? Break it down however you want, tiers, whatever you think. Just how do you view the Big 12 conference right now?
All right, you ready to rock? Let's do this thing.
Let's do it.
Tier 1 title contenders. I would put Houston, Texas Tech, Kansas, and BYU in that mix right now. Those 4 teams, I think, are going to head into next year. They're some of the richest teams in college basketball. They have talent that's through the roof. If Houston can get Milos Uzan back, I think you're talking about Houston as the best team in college basketball. And Texas Tech, retention is king. Getting JT Toppin back. BYU, obviously, AJ DeBonsa is such a big deal, but what they've done with their roster makes a lot of sense. Poaching Rob Wright from Baylor is obviously a big deal. Kansas, Darren Peterson's going to be a stud, probably top 2, top 3 pick in the NBA draft at minimum, but they're able to keep Flory Badunga. They've added some really nice pieces. Huge. They've added some really nice pieces around it in the portal too, like with vets. Last year, they kind of went with like some wings that we're from high major programs that thought they were coming to Kansas to be a star. This year, they really loaded up on like role players that want to be role players. So I put them in there. Tier 2, I would put like NCAA tournament, like legit locks on paper right now. I'm not super a huge fan of the ceiling of Iowa State, but Taman Lipsey's back, Josh Jefferson's back, Milan Momcilovic is back. That's a tournament team, and I'd put Arizona in that mix as well. Like maybe their roster doesn't wow you, but like Jaden Bradley back, Tobe Awaka back, Matias Krivas back, like Anthony Del Orso back. So like all of those guys like create such a good nucleus. You mix in some 5-star freshmen in there. Braden Burries is going to be a big time player for them as well. And then Koa Pete as well. Like I think Arizona's a tournament team. Then I go into tier 3. It's like, this is like the bubble. These are all the teams that are like this could go. We'll see how it goes. And it's Baylor, Cincy, K-State, West Virginia, Oklahoma State, TCU. That would be like those teams there on the bubble. Yeah. And then tier 4 is like the basement. These are teams that like I think obviously they have roster spots open. So continue to have to see what they have. But it's UCF, it's Colorado, it's Arizona State, and Utah. Those type of 4 teams there that as of right now have to work their way up. Now, I think Arizona State is clearly the worst team in the Big 12. I think Colorado is clearly the second worst team in the Big 12 right now, just on what the rosters look like. Yeah. And then maybe we could separate the basement from like tier 5 being like under the basement, and I would put Arizona State and Colorado in that mix. But that's where I'm at right now on May 19th.
Yeah, I think there's potential, obviously, for Utah and for UCF to put this together, right? You've seen greater investment in these teams, and I think again, like we were just talking about, Alex Jensen wanting to build towards the future. So I think that's totally fair. I want to get your thoughts on. Oh yeah.
One more point. Here's one thing too. The middle of the Big 12 stinks compared to some of the other high majors out there. So like you look at like the Baylors, the Cincinnatis, K-State, West Virginia, Oklahoma State, like there are holes to poking all of those teams. So I think that there's like a gap of like the top tier in the Big 12 is awesome. Then there's like Iowa State and Arizona are like pretty good rosters. And then after 6, it's like, you could talk yourself into any mix there between 7 and 16. And so like that is where, like, if you're looking at this from Utah, you're like, if we get the right breaks, if things happen with health wise, if we continue to evolve here, there is real room to grow, because I don't see 13 NCAA tournament teams out of this league. And that's not the case compared to like the Big 10 or like even like the SEC, where it felt like literally last year, every single roster in the SEC either has a lottery pick or is making the tournament. That's kind of what it was last year in the SEC.
Yeah, no, I think that's a really interesting point, where if you're Utah, you like that, because there's going to be some winnable games, and you have a chance to surprise next year. So I think that's very fair. I'd be doing a disservice if I didn't ask you your thoughts on the NBA draft, given the fact that you are from Illinois. I assume that you're a Bulls fan, and given the lottery,
sadly,
the state here is split red and blue, but that all combines for purple with the Utah Jazz. And so I'd be curious, man, what's the NBA draft big board look like for Isaac Trotter?
If you're a Jazz fan, it's just like, how did we not get the number 1 or number 2 pick? Like, good Lord, it's just brutal. I will say this though. I think that I'm really talking, if I'm a Jazz fan, I'm really talking myself into Con Knipple at 5. I think Knipple is a total beast. He's 6'7". He can pass, dribble, and shoot. He plays off 2 feet great. I kind of have comped him to a bigger Desmond Bane. And that type of player can play in the league for a really long time. And Knipple really impressed this year defensively as well. You have pedigree there too. He's been a 5-star. Like you kind of know what you're getting there. He's been really productive at every single step along the way. So, I think if you're the Jazz, you're like, oh man, like we don't get Cooper, we don't get, Ace Bailey maybe, or Dylan Harper at 2 or 3 there. But I think Knipple would be one heck of a consolation prize, and somebody that's going to probably stick in the league for 10 years and gives you a position to get ready for next year, where AJ, Darren Peterson, Cam Boozer, like you're still going to be able to kind of have your cake and eat it too. Because I think Knipple he fits with everybody. Any roster construction, you can find a place for Con Knipple on your basketball team.
Well, that'll be interesting for a lot of Jazz fans to hear that, because I think a lot of us are hoping that one of Ace Bailey, VJ Edgecombe, or Trey Johnson is there at 5. But Con Knipple, I'm with you. I think he's really super solid and a nice piece to have, because again, as you mentioned, that 2026 NBA draft is going to be loaded. So Isaac, man, I appreciate your time. You've been great. This has been a lot of fun. Would love to get you on later in the year once we know what these rosters look like exactly, and get your thoughts then. But for all the listeners, make sure to follow Isaac on 24 at 24/7 Sports on Twitter. He does a tremendous job with all of his work. Isaac, again, appreciate your time, man.
Of course, thanks for having me. No problem.